All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about how to take those multiple signals that you're getting from your stage, sending them down to where they need to go. And those are going to be using two different kinds of things: analog snakes or sub snakes, and potentially digital snakes if you're using a digital system. Now, analog snakes refer to usually two different kinds. There's regular analog snakes, which are going to be these big, giant, multiple inputs, usually 24 plus inputs, with a couple returns on the back end to send things out like monitor mixes and whatnot. And there's gonna be a big cable that comes off of it. It's gonna be a super long cable that can run all the way from your stage to front of house. And that's how you connect everything from stage to your mixer. In the digital realm, we use stage boxes where we actually have these big boxes that can sit on the stage. Sometimes you can place multiple boxes across the stage or keep them centralized. And instead of having this giant thick cable with every single XLR connection going from it to front of house, you actually just have a single, sometimes a second redundant Ethernet cable to connect from the stage boxes to front of house. So the benefits usually seen for digital is that it's a lot less cabling to deal with, a lot less copper, so it's usually a little more affordable in that rate, and there's a lot less that can go wrong. And you can also mount these stage boxes just about anywhere you want to and space them out across your stage depending on the configuration. Now, even with a digital system, you're probably still going to have some form of analog snake, or in this case, sub snake. Sub snakes are kind of small miniature versions of the giant analog snakes that you would have. And they're used to kind of just be dispersed around the stage to key points where there's a lot of inputs that need to get to a stage box. So you'll place these sub snakes around kind of key points, usually drum kits of one. Keys usually may have their own because they're going to have multiple inputs. Sometimes people put the one at front of the stage where the vocalist and guitars are. That way everyone can have like a easier, quicker point to get to instead of trying to run it all the way to the big patch in the back. Sometimes they'll have TRS returns on them. Sometimes they'll have XLR returns. Some even have Ethernet on them for certain purposes. And sometimes you may even see sub snakes built into the floor of your stage. And the whole point here, again, is just so that way we can easily and cleanly run lines from wherever they need to be on stage from our musician standpoint to the main stage box on the side of the stage. And the reason why we use these sub snakes is really just to keep the stage clean and to organize things. You see, it's a lot easier to use a couple sub snakes at key locations and run shorter 5, 10, 15 foot XLR cables from sources to the sub snake that's got some labeling on it and that we know is always going to go to a certain spot, and then patch it at the stage box where we have all the tails at, versus trying to run 50-foot cables for everything to a single point. It's just a lot easier, not cleaner to manage. All right, now I'm going to go one step further here and we're going to talk about split snakes. You see, in some medium to large size churches, when you have maybe a secondary sound console for monitors, or you're doing broadcast mix, or both, and you have three needs for audio, sometimes you want to have a little bit more control. And what I mean by control is you want to have the ability for each station, front of house, monitors, broadcast, or recording, to have their own gain control, because what front of house needs for gain is probably going to be very different than what monitors needs or broadcast. So split snakes are what we use to actually get each station its own copy of that microphone or DI box sent to it. Now, split snakes come in two different styles. There's analog and digital. Analog is going to look very similar to an analog snake because it's basically the same thing. However, it's going to be a lot bigger and it's going to have multiple tail copies of each input from that box. So you may have one set that's going to front of house and another set going to monitors. And if it's a good quality split snake, it's going to have transformers in it to actually keep those signals clean and separate them without causing any signal degradation. Now, one thing to keep in mind with these kind of setups is that you need to keep track of who's providing phantom power, because you can overload these microphones with too much phantom power from more than one source. So usually someone's designated as the phantom power supplier. Usually it's monitors because they're going to have more than just what front of house needs. But they're also going to have everything that front of house needs in general. So they'll provide most of that. Now, in the case of digital has two options. You can either do the analog route and route everything to multiple versions of stage boxes, or maybe some preamps into some digital audio converters. Or if you have a system that's capable of it, you can do digital splitting, where it's still technically the same gain structure, but The secondary system has the ability to trim or digitally turn down or up that gain. So one console will get dedicated control of the actual physical gain structure of the system, while the other console or consoles will have to piggyback off of that and adapt it to their needs by either turning it up or turning it down with a digital gain. So it's not quite the same as the analog system where everyone gets their own pure gain to choose from, but it's a great and very inexpensive compromise when the right situation calls for it. Now, what do I recommend? Well, as an audio purist who wants to have the best thing for everything, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to say you should get an analog split snake. And as expensive as they are, and as much of a pain they can be with how many patching points you've got now, if you got your setup done right, it's a really, really worthwhile option because you're going to get the best quality sound possible from everything. Everyone's going to be able to control their gains for what they need. Recording and broadcast usually needs a lot less gain than what front of house needs. So it's usually best to go that route. However, in the times where budget's a thing or the workflow just needs to be a little bit simpler, digital can be a way to go. And there's a couple different console manufacturers out there that do actually have dual preamp systems built in where they actually will have the ability for two consoles to hook up to the same microphone, and each one has their own dedicated preamp to work with. Midas usually comes to mind with that functionality, so check them out if you're interested in that kind of thing. But in general, it's always going to be one preamp where they have to share, and someone's got to make the decision of how much gain there truly is, and the other one's going to have to say how much virtual gain they have.